Thought I'd do a little tour of the greenhouse. Still picking some really nice red Russian kale on January 19th. Actually, Mizuna flowering. Not much pollination going on right now though, but that's okay. We've got a bunch of lettuces, lots of rosemary, a couple different kinds of kale. There's lots of oxalis root on the bottom, and mustard greens. Certainly enough to continue enjoying greens right through, almost all the way through the winter. And there is some heat on in the greenhouse, although not in this section. The greenhouse is 110 feet long, and there's this piece of plastic that I put up as a divider in the winter. The other side of this gets heated to 32 degrees. That's because there's three fig trees in there, and those were here when I bought the place, and I didn't want to just turn the heat off and let them die. So that stays at or around freezing at night. This space here doesn't get any heat, so it's pretty incredible that everything is still doing this well. Although they're kales, they're pretty hardy. I'll eventually, once we finished harvesting the kales and the lettuces and all that, the rosemary stays in here perennially. The other stuff, once it's kind of wound down in February, we'll take that out, add in some extra compost to amend these beds, and then replant for the spring. You can see here, I've just got some 2x4s on the ground, and this bed is really wide. It's about 10 feet wide, and it's just wheelbarrow load after wheelbarrow load of compost brought in there. And then that bed over there is a 5-foot bed. So just really simple retaining wood with, you can see a little rebar stave there just to keep it upright. And this is an old greenhouse that has these center posts, so I didn't really want to, you can't have a walkway down the middle, so I figured I just would make the whole thing into one big bed, and that has actually worked out really nicely. And then, again, the reason that this plastic is here is because this is the little fig heaven back here. I've got about 10 gallons of dried figs, so that's a lot of gallons of fresh figs that are in the freezer. I dry them and then freeze them just so they don't rot, because I've had them rot before. And then some other, this is where all my half hardy or somewhat not quite hardy to this zone plants go as well. This is a Musa Baju banana that I think they say the root system, probably next spring I'll plant this outside, because the root system can overwinter here in zone 6A, but obviously the tops can't make it. But if I really heavily mulch the root system, which is on the ground, theoretically it can re-sprout. And this whole stem is just a 1-year-old stem, so even if it is just the root system that survives, that's still pretty darn cool. If I could have that in the landscape, basically just for ornamental value, because it takes, I think, 18 months to ripen the bananas, so that's not going to happen. But it would be kind of fun, and the leaves are a really cool mulch that we can't really use up here. So we'll see if that works. This is an old heating system I made. I don't know if you noticed, there's a wood stove at the other end of the greenhouse, and it has a water jacket on it, and it pumps water into this barrel, which is open to the atmosphere, and then that would be 50 gallons of boiling water. And then I put it so that the water comes in through this pipe, goes down, and then comes out through this pipe, and then goes into this radiator that I just got from an old truck, and then returns the circuit here, and the pipe is buried in that big compost bed. So the compost bed can get some heat from the wood stove, and then there's just a little fan here to blow heat off. And when I have the wood stove really cranking, there's 100-degree air blowing right off that radiator, which is pretty darn cool. But I won't sugarcoat it. You have to be feeding that fire to the absolute hottest it can possibly go to just keep the greenhouse from freezing on a cold night. So you have to feed it. You have to feed the fire every hour or so. So it's really not something that was going to work for the long term, but it's a nice fallback emergency plan to have. When I bought the greenhouse, it had this old school oil burner in there, which is super reliable, and I just use that, like I said, to keep the figs alive. And in the spring, when we start the greenhouse with the vegetable transplants, we grow about 15 to 20 acres of vegetables, and we use that for heat. So that's fossil fuel, something that I'm definitely trying to upgrade away from in the future, but there's a certain reality of start where you are, and this is the infrastructure that came with the place, and we'll upgrade when we can, essentially. The upgrade or downgrade, however you want to look at it, with the wood stove was cool, but I don't quite have the ability to stay up every single night of the spring to keep my baby transplants alive. So I make the compromise there for now. But anyway, nice to have these greens throughout the winter. And then these trellises, we usually grow cucumbers or tomatoes in here in the summer. And this bench is where all the vegetable starts go. And essentially, there's some chicken food here. Green tomatoes that we took in at the end of the season. This is my little germination chamber. This is that wood stove I was telling you about with the pump that moves the water around. And this amount of bed space here, or bench space rather, we can pretty much get away with just that. That's 100 feet long by 5 feet deep, and we can grow transplants for 15 acres of vegetables on that. Of course, it's a dance because it gets really filled up with onions, and then the onions go outside, and then it gets filled up with the lettuce, and then the big, warm season crops of eggplants and peppers and tomatoes and squash and all that. But with hardening off space outside the greenhouse, we've been able to make it work with just basically this bench. And there used to be benches in here, and I found I didn't really need all of them, so we converted those over to growing spaces, and now it's a really nice unheated space for winter. And I don't really go to winter markets. I tried that for a couple of years, and it didn't work out very well for me. I'm sure I could get back into that and hopefully do it better than I did before, but for now I'm happy to have the break from the markets and just eat salads.